So the theme this time is the glitz and glamour of the red carpet, going to the movies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through how to put a little bit of that maximum swish into your everyday wardrobe. We're going to look at making a maxi skirt. So I'm going to take you through how to mark up your fabric, how to put in an invisible zip, and how to get that maximum swish from the minimum amount of fabric. We're going to go through all the different techniques you need. We're going to look at hems as well, and we're going to put on a waistband. So this tutorial is jam-packed full of fun stuff. I can't really sew in a ball gown, so I will make a little change. That's better. Now we can get on with the video. So first things first are a couple of measurements. I've got my tape measure handy, and what I want to do is first take a waist measurement. So we're standing up nice and straight, not breathing in at all. Keep your head up as you wrap the tape measure round, and then look down and get that number for round your waist. We'll write that down, and then we'll drop the tape measure down just a little further so that we can get a hip measurement. And then what we also want is your side leg. So you want to take the tape measure right from where you took your waist measurement all the way down. Pop your hand on your thigh so that you can then drop the top of the tape measure and bend down to see where that ankle bone is. So with all those measurements sorted, we're going to put them all together in order to be able to mark out our fabric. Now coming up next is a little sequence of exactly how to do that. There's a little bit of maths involved, but don't be scared, I'll take you step by step through it. So the sequence coming up is all to do with your fabric marking. I'll tell you how to fold the fabric, mark it up, and we'll get the pieces for our skirt cut. To create your skirt pattern, you're going to need to do a couple of calculations. First, we want to calculate how much seam allowance we will need to add. There are 6 seams, and we will need 3 centimeters per seam. That's the 1.5 centimeters for each side of that seam. If we times 3 by 6, we get 18 centimeters total seam allowance to bring all our 6 panels together. We also want to add a little bit of ease at the waistline, and that's going to be 3 centimeters. So if we first take our waist measurement, we add 18 and 3, jot that number down, and then we're going to divide it by 6. So it's divided equally for each of the 6 panels of our skirt. That will be measurement A. We're then going to take the hip measurement, add 18 centimeters and 3 centimeters, jot that number down and divide that by 6. That will be our measurement B. We then want our skirt length, and we're going to add 3 centimeters to that to allow 1.5 for the seam allowance and 1.5 centimeters for the hem allowance. Jot that number down, and that is going to be our measurement C. Fold your fabric lengthways with the right sides together. Work from the top edge of your fabric. We're going to mark out 3 panels of the skirt first, and then we'll repeat further down the fabric to get our final 3 panels to have 6 in total. Lightly mark a straight line across the top of your fabric. And then from the self edges, not the folded edge, mark measurement A inwards on that line. Measure down 15 centimeters, and then mark measurement B in from those same self edges across the fabric. Now measure all the way down and mark a line across at measurement C. Down at this line, and this time in from the folded edge, divide A in half and mark this across in from the fold. Mark 15 centimetres above this, half of measurement B. Join these lines with one long line going all the way from the top to the bottom. Now this line is shown as a diagonal, going nice and straight, but you may well, depending on your body shape, need to curve the line ever so slightly to make it meet all the way down. This is absolutely fine with the amount of fabric in this skirt. If the seam is ever so slightly curved, it won't matter. Measure down from each of your waistlines the length of your skirt and make a little mark on the line there. Bring a curved line up to each of those marks, and that will be the hemline of your skirt. Make all those marks a little more solidly if you need to, and these are the lines you will then cut. This will give you 3 panels of your 6-panelled skirt. Move your fabric down and repeat this sequence to create the other 3 panels. So just before we get into marking up our fabric, I wanted to take you through the fabric choices for this particular pattern. Now I've gone here for a viscose rayon. Anything involving viscose is going to be absolutely perfect for this pattern because it will drape beautifully and give you all that swish you want. You also want to have a really close look at your pattern to make sure it hasn't got a particular direction. We use the full width of the fabric and we need to turn some pieces from one way to the other. So having a good look at the pattern on your fabric and making sure you can find elements that both appear facing up and facing down will ensure that you've got a pattern that doesn't have a particular direction. Also, we need to talk about the width of the fabric. This being a maxi skirt, we want to have the widest width of fabric possible. So this is 140 centimetres wide, and that will work best for this pattern. Narrower fabrics you can still use, but you may well end up having to mark out your pattern onto paper first, and then using a lot more fabric to be able to fit those pattern pieces down the narrower width of fabric. For the skirt itself, I have got 2.5 meters of fabric. Ideally, what you want with 140 centimeter fabric is just over twice the length you want your skirt to be. So I measured my side leg as 106, so I know I definitely need over 2 meters of fabric. 2.5 meters of fabric will give you then enough for your waistband as well. So that's our fabric choice all sorted, and we'll get on with cutting out. So we've now got everything cut out. We've got 4 panels that were cut towards the edge of the fabric. We have got 2 panels that were cut on the fold of the fabric, and we have 2 long thin waistbands that were cut to the full width of the fabric. We've got a teeny tiny amount of remnants left over because we really have used all the fabric we can to make this skirt as swishy as possible. And what we now need to do, we'll pop the waistbands to one side, we'll deal with those later. We now want to bring together the skirt panels. Now we want to bring them together in quite a specific way. We want to sort the back and the front out separately, and we'll then be putting a zip into one side and a final seam into the other. The way to bring them together is to take the panel, or one of the panels, that has been cut on folded fabric, so it will have 2 seams running down, cut slightly on the bias of the fabric, and they need to sit in between 2 of the edge panels that have been cut. Again, it's the diagonal line cut through the fabric that is going to form the seam. So they go right sides down onto one of the pieces that has been cut on folded fabric and are joined together to form a panel of 3 with the folded piece in the middle and then the 2 pieces that cut along the self edge to either side. So to sew your seams, you're going to use a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. On a sewing machine, you want to take a straight stitch all the way down that seam allowance, 1.5 centimetres in. You then want to trim that seam allowance down to about half its size and use a wide zigzag to go over the raw edges of the fabric. You can always use an overlocker as well if you have one. Whichever you're using, we'll get those 3 panels stitched together first, and then we'll move on to having a little look at how we put in that zip. Now that those seams are sewn, we have 2 panels for our skirt that are made up of 3 individual panels. We'll iron those seams as we go along. So while they're separate, grab your iron and give all of those long seams a really good press from top to bottom. Also, while we have that iron handy, what we want to do is take our little waistband and take 2 of the short edges and pop them right sides together. We'll pop them under the machine and just quickly stitch them together. So we end up with one very long waistband that's going to go round the waist of our skirt and tie at the side as well. So it's a nice little feature. So I've joined those 2 ends together. I'll press that seam open, and then all the way along my little waistband, I want to turn in the edges by 1.5 centimetres on either side. So I'm going to press those edges in all the way along the waistband. So with waistband pressed, seams pressed, the next thing to move on to is popping that invisible zip into the side of our skirt. So, invisible zips. To put one of these in takes a little bit of time and practice. It is worth popping a couple into some sample fabric first, so you can get it absolutely perfect before you move on to the real thing. It's always good to run samples if you're doing anything in your dressmaking that you're not quite sure about and you want to practice first. There are a few different options of presser feet that are to do with zips. We've got the normal presser foot that you will get with your machine. Now that can get you so far with an invisible zip, but it really isn't the perfect one. You will find finishing the end of the invisible zip very difficult using your standard zipper foot. You also have what's called an invisible zip foot, which gives the impression it would be perfect for putting in invisible zips. It can help you very well with the initial process of stitching down the side of the teeth. But you need to know how to use it, and it also doesn't help you at all when you come to finish the bottom of the zip and to get it nice and flat and smooth. And to be perfectly honest, the finishing of the bottom of the zip is the make or break bit. You don't want a little pucker where the zip turns into the seam. You just want it to look like the whole thing is one continuous seam. So the foot that I would actually suggest is one of these, which is an adjustable zipper foot. Now you can get universal ones of these that will fit most makes and models of machine. You actually have to take away the foot mounting and put this on instead, and it sits that little bit higher so it has all the clearance underneath and you don't have any of the little wings or ridges at the edge of the other 2 presser feet that will get in the way of you being able to finish your zip perfectly. So I'm just going to attach this to the machine. So unscrew the presser foot mounting so that you can remove your clip for your presser feet. You're going to take the adjustable presser foot and pop it round that shank and then tighten up that screw so you can see it sitting above. Once that's nice and tight, you then want to have a little look at the positioning. Now, being an adjustable zipper foot, it can swing from left to right. an infinite number of positions. It just swings from one side to the other, depending on what side of the zip you're working on. What you don't want to do is have it in a position where that needle would bump into the edge of it. So just swing it over to one side and then very gently lower your needle, bring it up and down so that you can see it's just going to clear the edge of that presser foot. And when you come to move it to the other side, for the other side of the zip, do that same check again. The last thing you want is your needle bumping into it and then you've got a broken needle. Once the presser foot is on, we're going to turn our attention to the zip. Now, my zip is a little bit long for what I need, and that's something that can happen if you have bought a bargain bundle of invisible zips. If you've rummaged some in a charity shop or had them given to you, they're not always going to be the perfect length for what you need. So you can shorten zips. The easiest way to do it is to just mark where you want the length of your zip to be, and then take a bit of cotton, thread it up on a needle that's just the right colour for your zip. I'm going to tie a little knot in the end. And just at the length I want my zip to be, I'm going to push the needle through behind the teeth, but not through the front of the zip. And I'm going to work round and round, a few stitches, 4 or 5, make it nice and strong, and then tie a little knot afterwards. Once that's in place, you can cut the end of the zip away. So just below that stitch, take a pair of scissors, not your fabric scissors, I hasten to add. Find a pair of kitchen scissors, some that the kids have been using, and cut through the end of the zip just below that stitch. So my shortened zip is ready to go into its seam. Now, with an invisible zip, you actually put the zip into the seam first and then stitch the rest of the seam afterwards. So the zip goes in at the top and then the rest of the seam is sewn into place afterwards once the zip is firmly positioned. We're going to line the top of the zip up, the very top of the zip, with the top of the fabric. Now you'll see that the zip, when it's closed, doesn't go all the way to the very top of its tapes. There's 1.5 centimeters of tape spare at the top of the zip, and that's not a coincidence that it matches your seam allowance, because it just makes sure you can position it with the top of the tape at the top of your seam allowance, and then the zip pull actually starts where your waistband or facing or whatever it is you're going to be joining at the top of the zip should sit. So always line up the top of the tape with the top of the fabric you're joining it to. I'm laying the zip with the right side facing up towards me, and I have my 2 pieces of fabric with the right side facing up towards me as well. I find it easier to work through this little sequence to pin things into place so you don't get your zipping back to front or anything silly like that. So looking at the zip, I'm going to first turn it over to one side, lining up the edge of the zip tape, and I'm going to pop a couple of pins in. The zip is closed at the moment. So I'll pop a couple of pins to hold it firmly in place on that side. I'm then going to turn just my zip back over so I can fold back the seam allowance of the fabric and turn my zip back over so I can see where it should sit on the other side. And then I'm going to bring the whole thing over and match the edge of my zip tape to the edge of the other side of the fabric, and we'll do a little couple of pins there as well. Once those couple of pins are in, you can turn the fabric back over and just see that the zip is positioned nicely. Now, sometimes you'll have a zip that extends down the back of a dress and there's a waistband that needs to meet in the middle of it, something like that. Pinning like this helps you match that as best as possible before you start to put the tacking stitches in. Once the tacking stitches are in, you can then check again before you put the final stitches in. So it's a 3-step process. We pin, we tack, and then we do the final stitches before finishing that seam underneath. So from pinning that in place, I can see that my zip is going to sit nicely. I'm now going to open the zip because the zip has to be open in order to sew it into place. And I'm going to start by positioning it up on one side of the presser foot. Now you only want to be going through 2 layers of fabric. Make sure your layer of fabric isn't folded back against the zip. You just want the zip and 1 layer of fabric. Those 2 layers, nothing else. As I'm positioning up underneath the presser foot, I'm very slightly rolling the teeth back outwards so I can get those tacking stitches as close as possible to the zip teeth. So I'm going to start tacking right from the very top of the zip. So not from the top of the zip tape, because we might want to fold that away later, but right from the top of the zip, I'm going to start my tacking stitches and I'm going to run them down the side of those zip teeth. I'm rolling the zip teeth outwards, away from the presser foot and away from the needle as I do this. What you don't want to do is catch the teeth, but you want to get as close to them as possible. I'm traveling all the way down. I'll take out that final pin and I'm just going to go as close as I can to the head of the zip. Once I'm there, I'll do 1 little reverse stitch because this is still only tacking, and then I'll pop out and I'm going to work on the other side. So that's one side of my zip, nicely positioned. I tend to, at every stage, open and close the zip as I go. So I'm just going to zip it shut, zip it open again, and that makes absolutely sure I haven't caught any teeth on the way. If I have, it's very easy to just then pop that stitch open, whichever one is causing the trouble. And for the tacking stitches, you can just leave it like that with the little stitch popped open. If it's your real stitches, then you would top it up with just a little line of stitches where you needed to remove that. Okay, so I'm now tacking on the other side. So I need to move my presser foot over to the other side of the needle. I've swung it over to the other side. I'm just going to drop the needle down to double check that it's not going to bump into it. And then I'm positioning up my zip, just 2 layers, the zip and 1 layer of fabric. And I'm going to start stitching just again from the very top of the zip, not the zip tape, just the zip. And again, I'm rolling those zip teeth outwards away from the needle. And I'm going to carry on stitching all the way down as far as I can toward the zip head, making sure everything's nice and flat as I go. Once that's done, I zip the zip up again just to double check I haven't caught anything along the way. So that opens and closes quite nicely, and I can see there how the zip is going to sit in my seam. So I did my tacking stitches in a bright colour so that you could really clearly see them. What I now want to do is change over to a lighter thread so that you're not going to see this second line of stitches, and I will open the zip again and I am going to run another set of stitches, this time not tacking stitch size, so coming down from a 4 or 5 size just to a 2.5 size stitch. I'm going to pop it back under the machine. I'll swing that presser foot over again so that I can get really close to the right side of the stitches. And I'm going to roll that zip tape out and I'm going to run another line of stitches all the way along that zip tape. Once I've done that, I'm going to go to the other side of the zip tape, swing my presser foot across again, and then I'm going to do those real stitches down this side of the zip as well. Again, trying to get as close as I can to the zip head. all the way down to the other end. So my final stitches are now in place. I can do the zip up, I've triple checked that, and the two sides of the fabric are very clearly being held nice and close so the zip disappears into the seam. We then, working from the inside of the zip, want to fold all the seam allowances and the bottom of the zip right out of the way. You're looking to start right from the very bottom of your zip stitches, and you're looking to have your presser foot so that you can really nestle that needle right in next to the bottom of the zip. So push all the seam allowances away, bring the bottom of the zip right underneath the presser foot, and then lower the needle in so that you're right on top of those stitches that were holding the bottom of the zip. So you want to line up with those completely. If it helps, do the first couple of stitches by hand, just to make sure everything's staying nicely out the way. When you're happy you've got a couple of stitches into the fabric, just do a little reverse and then head all the way down your seam, just sewing as usual. If it's a very long seam, you can stop and change back to your normal presser foot when you're a good few centimetres underneath the zip. Or if it's just a short seam like this one, I'll carry on to the bottom, just like that. You can then take it out from underneath the machine and have a really good look at the seam you've managed to sew. What you should find is that the seam comes straight down underneath the zip without any little wrinkles or puckers underneath the end of the zip. So the top of the zip is here, the end of the zip is around here, but you can't really see, and then the rest of the seam carries on down. You give it a little press to make sure it's all nice and flat, and that's your invisible zip nicely inserted, ready to move on to your next stage. So using that method, my invisible zip is now in one side of my skirt. What I've also done is I've taken a zigzag just down the edges on either side of the zip to make sure there's a nice neat edge, no raw edges showing, and I've sewn the rest of the seam all the way down to the hem. The other side seam will now just simply need to be sewn from top to bottom before we pop on the waistband and sort out the hem. Now, just before you sew that seam on the second side, it's worth having a little try. Just wrap it round you and check that it's going to be a nice fit. If you need to use a little less or a little more seam allowance, now's the time to decide, because you can get that perfect fit. The zip is in one side and just fit from the other side. A little tweak or a change won't make too much of a difference to the size of the panels, and it'll get that lovely fit for you. So having checked that, we now want to sew the right sides together on that long seam that will join all the panels of our skirt into the round. With that last seam sewn, what we're now going to do is turn our attention to the waistband. The long strips of fabric that we joined and pressed earlier, we're going to get those back again and find the join, and what we want to do is find the seam that we just sewed, the one that's opposite the zip, and we're going to match the join in our waistband with the top of that seam. We'll pin that into place, continue pinning round the top of the waistband all the way to the zip on one side, and then all the way round to the zip on the other side as well. Once that's pinned into place, we'll stitch it all the way to enclose the top of the zip. So we've attached one edge of our waistband onto the waistline of the skirt. They meet nicely at the top of the zip, so that's perfect. You just check your positioning as you're sewing. And as we said earlier, there's 1.5 centimeters at the top of the zip tape. So if you line up with that, you know it's going to meet all the way round. We are going to give that a little press just to make sure. I know we pressed it earlier, but if you haven't quite stayed on that pressed line, we'll give the waistband a little press all the way round, just upwards towards the top of the skirt. And then once that's pressed, we're going to start to fold over and pin all the way round. Now what we want to do is fold our long waistband with that extra bit that's going to form the ties. We want to fold them down over the top of the zip, so that it's all going to be nicely enclosed inside. We're going to want to stitch looking at the outside of the skirt. So once you've folded it over and just checked that it's going to have that zip just inside it, you're going to want to pop a pin through all those layers to hold it together. Now along the ties, you can just keep on pinning all the way to the other end of the tie. When you reach the end, what you're going to want to do is the raw edge that you've got there, you want to fold it in before refolding your little tie together. So I've folded away the raw edge. I've now got a neat edge on the end of that tie, and I'm going to secure that with a pin as well. So keep pinning all the way along your tie and then work all the way round your waistline, just bringing that waistband over. Make sure it just covers the stitching that attached the first side of the waistband, and then looking at the right side of your skirt, pop a little pin to secure it into place. Once you've worked all the way round your waistband, what you're going to want to do is then stitch it into place. So again, the right side facing up towards you, you're going to want to pop it underneath the machine, and you want to stitch just at the lower edge of the waistband. So your stitches are all firmly on the waistband. They're catching the other edge of the waistband on the inside of the skirt, enclosing all those raw edges in, and you're going to travel all the way round. Once you've attached the waistband, we're then going to carry on and sew all the way down to the ends of the ties as well. Having sewn our waistband all the way round, we now have our ties and waistband firmly secured. Give the whole lot a lovely press, right from one end of the ties all the way round the waistband and round to the other end of the other tie. Make sure that's all nice and flat before we move on. So with that now pressed and done, we can turn our attention to the hem. Now it's at this point you're going to want to have a little try on to just double check that your hem is going to fall where you want it to. We added a couple of centimeters to make sure that you had room to either turn up a rolled hem or a folded hem, or you could overlock the hem if you wanted to for a very small, neat finish. It's entirely up to you, and it depends on the fabric you're using. If you've used something very, very light, then an overlock finish might be quite nice if you have one. Also for very light fabrics, the rolled hem is a really good idea as well. I'm going to do a rolled hem on this one today, so I'll talk you through that in just a minute. But what I want to do first is look all the way round my hem and make sure where the panels join there isn't a little jump or step. If you find one, there we go, we've got one there. If you find one where there's just a little difference between the fabric of one panel and then the fabric of another, so I've got like 1/2 centimetre just sticking out there, simply take your scissors and just very gently trim straight from that hem and then rejoin the curve of the panel just a little way away, and then you'll end up with a nice straight edge going from one panel to the next. Once you've checked for those all the way round, we can move on to the hem. So my rolled hem is going to be sewn underneath the machine. I just fold one small fold, just 1/2 centimetre or so upwards, and then the same again, 1/2 centimetre or so upwards. I'm not going to work too far ahead of myself, only 10 centimetres or so, and I'm just going to roll that hem into place before beginning to sew. Once you have a little section rolled, hold it with your fingers in that nice gentle curve, and then sew to the end of that section. So keep rolling, just short sections, 1/2 centimetre, then 1/2 centimetre again, smooth the curve and sew forwards. So that's a couple of miles of hem all sorted out, and that's our skirt finished. So here she is, all done. Our maxi skirt is complete. She's got that tie waist. This is one you can swish around in. You can dress it up with a pair of heels and handbag. You can dress it down with a pair of trainers and a t-shirt. It's a really versatile little skirt. I really hope you've enjoyed working through it with me. I've had great fun telling you all about the techniques involved, and I'd really love to hear from you. If you have a go, if you have any questions, just let me know and I'll be more than happy to help. So that's all for now, and I'll see you next time. Bye.